Christianity was never supposed to survive. That is the version of history most people were taught. A tiny band of poor fishermen wandering through hostile territory with no money, no political influence, no military backing, and no social power somehow managed to build the most influential religious movement in human history. The story sounds miraculous precisely because it appears economically impossible. But what if that version is incomplete? What if the early Christian movement was never financially helpless at all? What if hidden beneath the sermons, miracles, persecutions, and martyrdoms was an invisible economic machine powered by elite women whose wealth quietly funded the expansion of Christianity across the Roman Empire? Because the deeper historians dig into the earliest Christian texts, the more uncomfortable the evidence becomes. The apostles may not have been operating alone. And the real financial backbone of the early church may have been wealthy female patrons whose names were gradually minimized, overlooked, or forgotten entirely. The traditional image of the early church is intentionally humble: dust-covered disciples, simple robes, wandering preachers surviving on scraps, a grassroots movement of the powerless. But the actual logistics of spreading a new religion across the Roman world tell a very different story. Movements require money. Travel requires money. Ships require money. Food requires money. Meeting spaces require money. Scrolls, letters, messengers, legal protection, property access, transportation, and networking all require money. And the Roman Empire was not cheap. The Mediterranean world operated through patronage systems. Wealthy elites financed philosophers, politicians, temples, social causes, and intellectual movements in exchange for influence and status. Nobody rose socially or politically without patrons, which raises an explosive question. If Christianity expanded across cities, provinces, and continents within a single generation, who financed it? Because fishermen from Galilee could not independently sustain international missionary operations stretching from Judea to Rome. Someone else was paying. And hidden throughout the New Testament are clues pointing directly toward powerful women. The first major clue appears in the Gospel of Luke. Buried almost casually within the text is a statement most readers pass over, without noticing its implications. Luke mentions several women traveling with Jesus and the apostles, including Mary Magdalene, Joanna, and Susanna, then adds one astonishing line. These women were helping to support them out of their own means. Their own means. That sentence changes everything. Jesus' ministry was not operating without financial structure. It already possessed organized economic support. And according to the text itself, wealthy women were funding it directly. Who were these women? Joanna alone opens a doorway into an entirely different world than most people imagine. Luke identifies Joanna as the wife of Chuza, the manager of Herod Antipas' household. That is not a random detail. Herod Antipas governed Galilee under Roman authority. His court operated within elite political circles connected to imperial administration itself. If Joanna was married to a high-ranking financial administrator inside Herod's government, then she likely possessed access to wealth, influence, education, and elite social networks. Think carefully about what that means. One of the women financing Jesus' ministry may have been connected directly to the ruling political structure of Galilee. The movement was not entirely outside elite society. It had insiders. And Joanna was not alone. The gospel texts repeatedly show women functioning as logistical supporters. They provide housing, food, hospitality, and financial assistance. But later church tradition often reduces them into passive followers rather than strategic contributors. That reduction may not have been accidental, because in the Roman world, wealthy female patrons possessed extraordinary influence despite living within patriarchal systems. Elite Roman and Greek women frequently financed temples, civic projects, religious associations, and philosophical schools. Inscriptions across the empire reveal women sponsoring buildings, public works, and entire communities. The early Christian movement emerged directly inside that cultural environment. It would have naturally relied upon patronage networks to survive. And women may have been uniquely positioned to support it. Why? Because Christianity offered something radical compared to much of the ancient world: dignity, status, spiritual authority. The movement preached that social distinctions were secondary before God. Male and female believers worshiped together. Women participated visibly in house churches. Female converts gained roles unavailable within many traditional Roman religious systems. For wealthy women trapped within rigid elite structures, Christianity may have represented both spiritual meaning and unprecedented social influence, and in return, they invested heavily. One of the clearest examples appears in the story of Lydia. The book of Acts describes Lydia as a dealer in purple cloth from the city of Thyatira. That single description reveals enormous economic significance. Purple dye was luxury commerce. The ancient purple trade was associated with wealth, royalty, and elite markets because producing purple dye was incredibly expensive. Merchants dealing in purple textiles operated within high-income commercial networks. Lydia was not poor. She was a businesswoman involved in international trade. And when Paul arrives in Philippi, Lydia becomes one of his first major supporters in Europe. After her conversion, she immediately offers her home as a meeting place for believers. Again, modern readers often underestimate the importance of that gesture. A private home large enough to host gatherings in the Roman world signaled substantial wealth. Early churches did not initially possess dedicated church buildings. They met in homes. That means wealthy homeowners effectively became operational headquarters for Christianity. House churches were not tiny Bible studies hidden in huts. Some likely functioned as organized urban religious centers financed by elite patrons. Lydia's house may have become one of Christianity's earliest European bases of operation, and that pattern repeats constantly. Phoebe appears in Paul's letter to the Romans. Paul describes her using language that becomes extremely controversial when translated accurately. He calls her a diakonos of the church and a prostatus to many people, including himself. Those Greek terms are explosive. Diakonos later becomes associated with official ministry roles. Prostatus carries meanings connected to patronage, protection, sponsorship, and leadership. In other words, Phoebe was likely not merely a helper. She may have been a wealthy patroness with substantial authority inside the Christian network. Even more significant, many scholars believe Phoebe personally carried Paul's letter to the Romans. That was no minor task. Transporting an official theological letter across the empire required trust, resources, literacy, travel capability, and status. The carrier often explained the contents personally to congregations, which means one of Christianity's most influential theological documents may have been delivered, defended, and presented by a wealthy female patron. Yet generations of history reduce Phoebe into a footnote. Why? Because later institutional structures increasingly centralized male authority. As Christianity evolved from persecuted movement into imperial religion, many early female leadership roles became uncomfortable for developing hierarchies. The evidence remained in the text, but the interpretation changed. Then there is Priscilla, or Prisca, as some texts call her. Priscilla and her husband Aquila appear repeatedly alongside Paul. But something fascinating occurs in several passages. Priscilla's name appears before her husband's. That was unusual in ancient writing conventions. Typically, male names came first unless the woman possessed higher social status or greater prominence within the context. Some scholars believe Priscilla may have been wealthier, more educated, or more influential than Aquila himself. Together they host churches in their home, instruct converts, and operate as major Christian organizers. At one point, they even correct the theology of Apollos, an influential preacher. That means a woman was involved directly in theological instruction at Christianity's highest early levels. Again, this complicates the simplified story many people inherited. The early church was not merely groups of male apostles preaching in isolation. It was an interconnected network sustained by property owners, merchants, patrons, administrators, and financiers, many of whom were women, and the Roman social structure unintentionally helped make this possible. Elite women in the empire sometimes possessed independent wealth unavailable to lower class. Man, widows especially could control estates, businesses, servants, and property. Without husbands actively controlling finances, certain wealthy women exercise enormous economic freedom. Christianity entered precisely that environment, and unlike many traditional systems, the movement welcomed female participation aggressively. That combination created powerful results. Women with money found purpose. The movement found funding. The apostles found infrastructure. And Christianity spread rapidly. But the financial dimension goes deeper than individual donations. The early Christian network functioned almost like a decentralized economic alliance. House churches provided regional bases. Patrons funded travel. Merchants carried information along trade routes. Elite converts opened access to urban centers. Letters circulated through private networks. Hospitality systems reduced operational costs for missionaries moving city to city. Without these support systems, Paul's missionary journeys become nearly impossible logistically. Consider the distances involved. Paul travels across Asia Minor, Greece, and eventually toward Rome itself. Those journeys required ships, lodging, food, legal assistance, and communication channels. At times, Paul worked as a tent maker, yes, but self-employment alone cannot explain the scale of mobility and organization visible in the New Testament. The movement clearly possessed broader financial support, and women appear constantly at the center of it. Even Mary Magdalene deserves reevaluation. Later traditions transformed her into a repentant sinner, despite the Gospels never explicitly describing her that way. Instead, the texts portray her as one of Jesus' closest followers and one of the financial supporters of the ministry. Some historians suspect Mary Magdalene herself may have possessed substantial independent resources. Her ability to travel consistently with a group suggests economic flexibility uncommon among impoverished women in the ancient world. And there's another detail people rarely discuss. Women remain present during the crucifixion when many male disciples flee. Why? Possibly because women drew less immediate suspicion from Roman authorities. They could move more freely around executions and public spaces without appearing politically threatening. That made female followers strategically important for communication and continuity during crisis moments. After the resurrection narratives begin, women again become central witnesses and messengers. The pattern is impossible to ignore. Women were not peripheral to Christianity's survival. They were essential to it, and perhaps nowhere is this clearer than in Rome itself. The Apostle Paul's final greetings in the book of Romans read almost like a map of hidden Christian infrastructure. He names numerous women directly: Phoebe, Priscilla, Mary, Eunia, Tryphena, Tryphosa, Persis, Julia, and others. Many appear connected to house churches or leadership circles. Eunia becomes especially controversial because Paul refers to her as outstanding among the apostles. That phrase has sparked centuries of debate. Was Eunia actually considered an apostle? Early church writers often believed so. Only later did translators begin masculinizing the name into Eunias because female apostles became institutionally uncomfortable. But the oldest evidence overwhelmingly supports Eunia being a woman. If true, one of the earliest recognized apostles in Christianity was female. That changes the entire conversation, and it reveals a pattern repeated throughout history. Influential women becoming gradually obscured as institutions formalize power structures. The irony is extraordinary. Christianity may never have expanded globally without wealthy female patrons, organizers, homeowners, financiers, and leaders. Yet many of those women were later minimized inside the very institution they helped build. But why would women support Christianity so aggressively in the first place? Because the movement offered revolutionary social possibilities. In the Roman world, women often existed legally under male authority. Elite women possessed privileges, yes, but public influence remained limited structurally. Christianity introduced spiritual equality that destabilized traditional hierarchies. Paul's famous statement that there is neither male nor female, for you are all one, sounded socially explosive in the ancient context. The movement gave women visibility, participation, purpose, influence, and in some cases leadership that attracted support from women capable of financing expansion. Christianity also excelled at forming tight communal bonds. Wealthy patrons gained more than theological beliefs. They gained networks, loyalty, social identity, and moral purpose beyond elite Roman decadence. For some female converts, funding Christianity may have represented rebellion against the moral emptiness of aristocratic society itself, and the movement rewarded that investment strategically. House churches became centers of local authority. Patrons gained immense respect within communities. Financial supporters helped shape missionary priorities. Economic influence translated into spiritual influence. That model helped Christianity grow faster than competing movements. The religion spread through relationships, homes, commerce, and patronage rather than military conquest during its earliest centuries, and women stood at the center of those systems. Even persecution unintentionally strengthened their importance. Public male leaders were often arrested first. Wealthy female patrons could preserve property, maintain gatherings discreetly, distribute resources, and protect local believers during crackdowns. The movement's decentralized structure made it resilient. Destroying one leader did not destroy the network, because the network rested inside homes, families, patrons, merchants, widows, and communities. Rome struggled to eliminate Christianity partly because Christianity functioned socially before it functioned institutionally, and wealthy women were among its strongest social anchors. By the 2nd and 3rd centuries, evidence of female patronage becomes overwhelming. Archaeological inscriptions reveal Christian women funding cemeteries, churches, charitable systems, and religious communities. Some women became major benefactors whose donations sustained entire congregations. Yet as Christianity gained political legitimacy under the empire, leadership structures became increasingly formalized and male-dominated. The earlier fluidity narrowed. Memories shifted. The movement that women helped finance and spread slowly rewrote parts of its own origin story. Not entirely. The evidence remained scattered through letters, inscriptions, and gospel references, but the spotlight moved elsewhere. The apostles became heroic symbols. The women became supporting characters. The economic machinery faded into the background. And perhaps that was intentional because acknowledging the full reality disrupts popular myths about how religious movements grow. People prefer the image of spontaneous miracles unsupported by material systems. But history rarely works that way. Ideas require infrastructure. Even revolutions need accountants. Even prophets need patrons. Even apostles need funding. The forgotten women of early Christianity understood something many modern institutions still underestimate. Controlling resources shapes the future. These women did not merely donate occasionally. They built networks, opened homes, funded missions, protected leaders, hosted congregations, financed travel, carried letters, managed logistics, and in doing so, they helped transform a regional movement into a global faith. Without them, Christianity may have remained a small sect crushed by time and empire. Instead, it crossed oceans, entered palaces, outlived Rome itself, and beneath that expansion stood women whose names history nearly buried, not because they lacked importance, but because they possessed too much of it.